Good morning. Today is May the 6th. We are 1 week away from the end of school. And I was listening to Mr. Turner talk this morning. And, we are not only 1 week away from the end of school, but think about it, we're literally nearly halfway through the year 2020. How will the year 2020 be remembered? I think this. I think that the year 2020 is going to be that big remind to us that we're not the boss. We being the human race, we're not the boss on this planet. We are part of a community, and as part of a community, there is a force of nature that is bigger than us, and and so yeah, I just think that is interesting. And like you, I so look forward to the day when we're not doing this anymore. The day when I can go to a movie again. Mr. Halleck, Mr. Pugh, Mr. Niehaus, you might be interested to know that I've started watching Band of Brothers again. That's very good. Along with that thing, World on Fire on KET. That's really a good series. World on Fire on KET. It comes on every Sunday night about 9, maybe 10 o'clock. I don't know. I DVR it, so I watch it at my leisure. And that's a very good series as well. But yeah, I'm watching Band of Brothers again, looking at details of training and things like that. It's just interesting. But yeah, the big thing to take away, who would have thought? Who would have thought 6 months ago that we'd be living like moles, basically hiding from this virus? Because that's what our strategy is, to hide from this virus. Come on, vaccine. I'm like you. I want to go to a movie again. I want to go to a restaurant again. I want to go, I want to stand out in the hall and yell at people for doing this, the good life, right? Anyway, so today we're talking about, once again, the age of the spirit of industrialism, realism, and impressionism. Once again, not my favorite artistic period, but yeah. It's one, undeniably. And once again, it's also, Impressionism is the most reproduced art form. You go into offices, homes, and it's more likely you'll see works of Impressionism than any other specific work of or type of art today. And so, yeah, with that being said, let us get started continuing this discussion of the philosophies that arose during the Industrial Revolution. I hope, do you have it paged up? Do you have your industrial age paged up with your pen or whatever? The cool thing about this computer is that, you can follow me along with the notes right there. And then, you can just insert answers, which I think is cool. Like I said, I may do this next year when we go back to school for real. When will we go back to school for real, Mr. Horton? I don't know. Better be used to this, is what I will say that. I don't know, though. I'm not an authority. I make no decisions. So out of this era, meaning the industrial age, will rise GWF Hegel, Hegelianism. and his disciple Karl Marx. Hegel he was a historian. Very important people, historians. They don't make anything, but it's impossible to move forward without knowing where you came from. Otherwise, you do this. Out of this era rose G.F.W. Hegel and his disciple Karl Marx. Hegel saw history as the rise of the thesis, and I kind of adhere to this idea. In other words, a series of events moving one way, and then an antithesis, a reaction to that series of events, you see. Take, for example, the movement from the Enlightenment to Romanticism. Think about it. Remember what the Enlightenment was about. The Enlightenment was about all things are logical, focusing on Greek and Roman, neoclassicism, trying to recreate the logic of the ancient Greeks and Romans, that everything must be squared with a mathematical formula. And then Romanticism comes and says, nuh-uh, the world is not a perfect place. And there are many parts of the human experience that are simply undefinable through logic. And so you see the reaction. Now, Romanticism makes all the paintings look, very dramatic and flexed, and all the heroes are so heroic. And then in reaction to that comes realism, where everything is gray and gritty and, not pretty. And heroes are not heroic. Heroes are human beings who do real human things. And so, swing, swing, swing. So, Hegel said that the Roman Empire rose above all other civilizations with its organization and its hedonism. You remember hedonism, right? It then was replaced by Christian feudalism, which they try to throw out hedonism, but feudalism, as you remember, everybody's fighting. But it's swing, swing, same thing. Karl Marx, and look at me there, I'm so funny, who was not as funny as Groucho, Harpo, Chico, and Zeppo, saw history as an economic struggle between those who have and those who do not. Now, for your test, those two words, you see them right there, the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. The term bourgeoisie Marx borrowed from the French Revolution. Marx, though, meant it to include the owners of production, the rich guys. Marx basically said that history is a long record of the rich guys abusing the not rich guys, which is true, to be honest. And so, the bourgeoisie is the ownership class. They're the ones who own the means of production. Proletariat are the working class. Marx predicted that the working proletariat, who make up the great, great, great majority, would rise up and overthrow the bourgeoisie and establish what he called a dictatorship of the working class. Today, we call this a form of government called communism. It is worth noting that Marx envisioned this form of government economics first gaining a foothold in an industrialized society like you might find in Germany, the Netherlands, France, England, or even the United States, because he said that, you needed this large class of industrial workers, this large class of people who lived only through wages, monetary wages. Ironically, of course, didn't happen. Why didn't Karl Marx's theories take off in those areas? Well, given time, the Industrial Revolution does raise the standard of living. I mean, look at us. Once again, because the industrial, I mean, everything we touch and come in contact with, everything that I'm looking at in you and all your clothes and everything all around me, this house, is a part of the Industrial Revolution. It was mass produced. Our lifestyles are part of the Industrial Revolution. We operate according to a clock, according to minutes. Well, I'm getting off the subject again. Point of the matter is that the Industrial Revolution, there's part of the Industrial Revolution now, that lawnmower drowning me out. Point of the matter is the Industrial Revolution does eventually raise the standard of living. Now, in the early stages of the Industrial Revolution, trust me, it's a rough patch. I mean, if you go to countries like developing countries today, Lagos, Nigeria, Jakarta, Indonesia, Mumbai, India, and places like that, you will find peoples struggling in the early parts of the Industrial Revolution, where workers live in horrid conditions and go work for a giant factory and get paid a little bit of money and live these awful, awful lives. And, you know, that is in Europe what happened in the early stages of the Industrial Revolution. What is happening now in those parts of the world I just mentioned happened in Europe. For example, London, industrial era London, was 4 times as densely populated as Mumbai, India is today. I mean, wrap your head around that. Yeah, London of the year 1800, we'll say, 1820, 1830, was 4 times more crowded, more densely populated, people living on top of each other than is Mumbai, India today. And if you've ever seen pictures of Mumbai, India, it's a mess. But eventually, given time, it does raise the standard of living. Now, in between this time, the early days, and that time, a whole lot of people are going to do a whole lot of suffering. And I sit there and just say that, like, you know, it's so casual. I mean, it's the truth without making commentary on it. Yeah, industrialization of a society is a painful process, very painful. It is not only hard on the people who live there, of course, it is very polluting to the environment. I mean, it is kind of interesting watching how during this COVID thing, how nature is kind of creeping back, you know, because there's not as much human activity. That nature, you can actually see, like in Venice, you can actually see to the bottom of the canals of Venice. You don't see a whole lot of animal life there because places are way polluted, but you can see the bottom. The dust is settled. The murky dust is settled. And in many parts of the world, you can see animals creeping back in to the environment. Sometimes I think that's a little bit creepy because a lot of these animals are predators. But yeah. Anyway, where was I? I was talking about, yeah. So Marx envisioned that his government, his idea for government was going to happen in an industrialized area. But it didn't happen there. Why? Because life got better for the workers eventually. Of course, we know the first country to become communist socialist was 1917. I'm waiting for your answer. Wake up, Mr. Gay. And yes, it was Russia. Thank you for that, Miss Cook. Pardon me. And the second was China. What do these two areas have in common? At the time the communists took over in both Russia and China, they were big fat farms. Mr. Halleck, you remember me always used to say that, big fat farms. Well, they were. I mean, both Russia and China were wholly not industrialized. They were farming countries. And that's where communism first took root. Today, the following governments are socialist, communistic in their governments and economies. Okay, this is on your test. China, Cuba, and our good friends, Scouts Honor, our good friends in North Korea. Yes, our good friends. Okay. Now, here we start talking about something, the art form called realism. The new spirit born of the industrial world was something called realism. Realism, I mean, it's not too hard to define or understand. It's just a way, an artistic way of looking at the world through both and I'm sorry, I'll go wash my hands after this lecture. Through both art and literature, as it really was, in such a way to expose the needs and injustices of the existence of mankind. Basically, what realism does, once again, it's that pendulum of art swinging the other way. Romanticism was, glory of nature. Romanticism, what is good about mankind. Romanticism, painting these broad pictures of beautiful people. Realism paints them ugly. Realism paints them as they are. Realism shows life in its gritty, mundane, common existence. The most important, most militant realist painter was Gustav Corpe. Unfortunately, we can't look at his burial at Ormond, but let me assure you, the burial at Ormond is this picture of a burial and a bunch of people standing around at the burial of this one individual. And the entire thing, in fact, you can see in the distance of the picture that the sky is kind of yellow-red, which is an indication of a level of smog, the sun cutting through smog. And I think I've told you this before. Back in the good old days, when I lived down in Covington, and here we're talking about 1980, 81, I finally got my first car. And my first car, I loved that car, was a 1979 powder blue Camaro with a spoiler. Chick magnet, definitely. Well, I parked the poor girl on the street, and it would not, never failed that every day I'd walk out there, especially after a weekend where the car had been sitting there a day or two, and I would look down the car and take my finger and run, kind of gently run along the paint, and there'd be a film of grit that had fallen from the skies. And so, yeah. Industry is dirty, and so that would be the kind of art that portrays the gritty realism. Same with the horse fair, which you could see, it shows the mistreatment of horses and the sale of horses. Okay, now let's go to part D there and look at this first name, and this name will be on your test as one of the four main impressionist artist. There's Manet, Monet, Degas, Renoir. Manet, Monet, Degas, and Renoir. He's my favorite. If I have a favorite Impressionist painter, it is Renoir. Uh, Renoir, and by the way, once again, all four of them were French. All four of them knew each other, and they all lived in Paris. Within the same, they lived in the poor section of Paris, frankly, the Moulin Rouge section of Paris, where they could live on cheap rents, and they were the original starving artists. But anyway, let's get back to part D. This guy, Edouard Manet. Manet actually begins as a realist before he moves over to Impressionism. Edouard Manet painted Les Déjeuners sur l'herbe, luncheon on the grass. And I will have to send you a picture of that tomorrow. Luncheon on the grass shows these four Parisian people having a picnic lunch. And the two guys, there's two guys and two ladies. The two guys are dressed, in suits. And the two girls are not dressed. And see, that's the thing. That's the thing about it. It scandalized the Parisian art world. And by that time, Paris had become the center of Western world's art. It scandalized the Parisian art world because the women in the painting were They were known women, well-known women who posed for that. It wasn't some generic face, representing some generic person or some figure of history. It was a Parisian woman representing herself in a piece of art. And scandalized Paris with a depiction of a nude woman seated with clothed male companions. For those of you who know what Bow Wow Wow is, it was actually a group of the 80s with a song called I Want Candy. I Want Candy. Who tried to repose this picture on the album cover. What is an album? Whoever knew, by the way, ever knew that vinyl albums would come back? Whoever knew that this lawnmower would keep coming back? Okay, while the Parisian audience could accept nudity of a painting, they could not accept the way that Manet depicted, because people knew who this woman was, and it's like porn trying to be passed off as high-end art. So Manet then became something of a leader of a group called the Impressionists. Manet, Monet, Degas, Degas. Degas, and you want to write this down, Degas, he had the hots for dancers. Yeah, he was always hanging around the Moulin Rouge, and he was always painting dancers. And finally, Renoir, who, like I said, is my favorite. Why is Renoir your favorite, Mr. Jordan? To be honest, and this shows what a rube I am, Renoir is my favorite because I can look at his art and say, oh yeah, I can tell what that is. Many of the other Impressionists, I'm going. So Monet did his haystacks and his water lilies. Degas had his dancers, Degas dancers. Renoir, I will send you tomorrow the picture of my favorite Renoir. It's called The Two Sisters. Why is it not your favorite? It's these girls. One looks like she's maybe teenage young adult, and the other is her little sister. And Renoir uses a lot of reds and blues, and it's very pretty. I just think it's pretty, that's all. Okay. let's continue on. We'll get back to the Impressionists in a while. And we talked about this before, the invention of the Daguerreotype. And that should be, is that Charles Daguerre? That should be, his name wasn't Charles, it was Louis Daguerre. Yes, Louis Daguerre. Yeah. Louis Daguerre. Yeah, not Charles. Louis Daguerre. Let me change that. I want candy. Louis Daguerre ushered in an entirely new art world, the art world of photography, while causing another one, that being the world of painting, to seek new frontiers. I mean, see, it does. There's two things here. I mean, photography is an art form now. Even in the day of moving pictures, photographic art still has a place in the art world. And so Louis Daguerre, and once again, Daguerre, his invention called a daguerreotype was nothing but a black box, an empty black box. And in the bottom of the box, there was a tray. And in the tray was a solution that contained silver nitrate and some other things. And then a special kind of white paper that lay in the bottom of that tray. And by having an open lens on one end of the box, and then by keeping the box completely still for like 20 minutes and the figures completely still, that the image that the daguerreotype is pointed at will be reflected onto the pan. You know, comes in, and there's a mirror here, it reflects onto the pan. And yeah, you'd have your image in 20 minutes, and for a lot cheaper than hiring a very skilled person to paint your portrait. So now there were still patrons, in other words, people who wanted the hand-painted portrait, but more and more to attract patronage, the artist now had to express much more in his pictures than just a photo-like image. The artistic technical name for this kind of art is called academic art. And so academic art, I won't say it went out the window, but the artist had to go in another direction. And this is when we get into Impressionism. Because the artists they quit just depicting things as they actually look. And they start trying to get you, the viewer of art, to see what they see, to look through their eyes in a different way. So, as it says there, the painter artist must now portray not only what is on the surface, but also find ways to express what lurks beneath and beyond the obvious. Gaspar Felix Triconon, also called Nadar, specialized in portraits of the famous, as well as the realities of the latter-day industrial Paris. Art that reflected this style was called realism. For the example, the American Winslow Homer, who did Whistler's Mother, and Thomas Eakins, who drew a painting of an actual dissection of a corpse. Okay, guess where we are? We're on Roman numeral 5, and we're going to pick up realism in writing tomorrow. Yes. I did send you, I put this in Canvas, some pictures of my trip in 2013 with Wes to the UK, and we went through a little industrial town called Bridgenorth. And we stayed in a B&B, a bed and breakfast. And the place we stayed in was an old industrial era from it might have been the early 19th century, could have been the late 18th century. We stayed in this house where workers lived. And one thing I want you to catch from it, see how tiny it is. Now, of course, it's been remodeled. Of course, it's been, made nice and everything like that. But trust me, it was tiny. And that's where workers live. And so, yeah. With that, we're at 30 minutes now. I'm going to pick up tomorrow. And what about our test on Friday? I'm thinking it's probably going to get moved back to at least Monday, if not Tuesday. And so there. All right. So this is Johnny signing off. Mr. Halleck, once again, you should watch Band of Brothers. It's good stuff. And you too. I think you'd like it, Mr. Pugh. I'm sure you would. Goodbye now.